Tuesday, the 8th.
Yes, sir.
You're alive. I think.
You think? Are we sure yet?
Yes.
Okay. This is Senate Transportation, and it is Tuesday, the 8th of April, and we are here with Ledge Council, and we're trying to finish up our first round go through of the T-bill H-88. You're on, David.
All right. Good morning. For the record, I'm Daniel Leonard from the Office of Legislative Counsel. We left off at section 11, which is on page 16 of your bill. It is amending sections 27 through 29 of the 2023 T-bill, which related to the mileage-based user fee, or MBUF. So what we've done in these sections is we've updated the language to reflect current reality. So clearly we are not starting a mileage-based user fee this coming July 1. So we've updated that to July 1, 2026, subject to sufficient funding being available for implementation. As we all know, we have a tight state budget this year, and there's a 90-day hold that was put on the federal grant to develop the MBUF program. So I believe the budget as it passed the House has $1 million in it for the MBUF, and that we are still waiting to hear on the federal hold. My counterparts from AO2 can certainly provide more input on what's happening at the federal level and what their sense is of whether that money will eventually come through or not at this point. So
I would, I appreciate the piece that said sufficient funding. With the 1 million, at most we'll have 1.7 of
That's right.
$3.7 million project.
right.
I think the agency's feeling some better about the chances of getting the $3 million in the grant form. I think, and I say this for you because we're gonna probably want some drafting around this. I'd like at some point the agency to come back to either JTOC or in plus the Joint Fiscal Committee with updates on where you are. Because if that money doesn't come through, we absolutely know we can't go live on July 1st to 26th.
Right, but we do have another session to update that date. But I think we should know on the 90-day before the end of the session. So we could update this, but we might be holding that pretty late.
I understand that, but I think through the rest of the year, we're gonna have a lot better information from that, and I would rather at least Joint Fiscal, probably JTOC, that we get updates on this. Okay. If we know sometime in the next 3 months that the grant's not coming through, we can update next winter all we want, but there's not the money to put this in place.
Right.
And I'm charging off spending, quite frankly, if I would tell you, I'm a little, if we've only got $1 million and we've got a $3 million hole to fill, I think it's a clear decision that the legislature ought to be involved in how fast and what we do to move ahead. I'm not sure I want to spend the $1 million on something that I can't do anything.
Yes.
So why would I spend $1 million if this is going to turn into a 3-year project to get done? And however that happens, I think the legislature in some form ought to be involved.
Understood.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Yep, that's fine. I've got notes to begin working on language for updates. And also just to be ready if we do get some updates to change the section. Moving forward in here, what you'll see as we go through this language here is that we've updated the language throughout. So we've identified the electric vehicle infrastructure fee in paragraph 2, which was implemented and which did not have a name yet when this was first passed. We have in section 28 of the 2023 bill on page 17, we've identified the additional money that was appropriated and authorized for fiscal year 2025 for the non-federal match money. So that is two $350,000 appropriations for the $700,000 that we currently have. We've added contingent language in subsection B there. The agency shall utilize state or federal funding or both for the purpose of designing the mileage-based user fee. And then we've added availability of sufficient funding language in C and moved out the date by 1 year to 2026. In section 29, yeah.
Oh, wait a minute.
Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. And since Edward Harrison also has a question. I just had a little bit of confusion around section 28 where, and perhaps I just misunderstood. I thought the $350,000 was coming from the general fund. Okay, so it's the 350,000 is coming from the T fund. And then we also have general fund money coming in a later section, is that?
So this year, the House passed budget has 1 million general fund.
Okay.
That is going towards this project. And that is contingent. I believe it's contingent on the federal funding not coming through. I should double check that. But that money is in the one-time appropriations in the big bill.
Okay, so we won't see that in here.
No.
Okay, but the 350 is from the T fund. So in total, this entire program will get 1,350,000.
So if all the money that has been appropriated to date, plus the money that is proposed to be appropriated in the House version of the big bill were appropriated, you would have 1.7, assuming no federal grant money comes through.
Okay, thank you.
So, and you need, I believe, 3.7 is the estimate. So,
could we include that in the T bill to note that, or is that? Do we?
you mean
have to do
the
that?
1 million from so the House Appropriations Committee, and I certainly don't want to speak for the Senate Appropriations Committee with so many members on this committee. But the House Appropriations Committee's preference was to keep the appropriations all in one bill.
Oh.
And so they pulled that language and other language around transferring 1.4 million to account for the EV infrastructure fees. So that transferred to ACCD for use in the residential and business or multi-unit and business level 1 and 2 charger program was inadvertently omitted. So they took care of all of that in the big bill rather than doing that in the T bill.
Okay.
So
Okay, so we won't see the EV infrastructure move then either.
that's in the big bill. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. So I was wondering, and it may be that it's because it's a different bill, but on line 20 where it says state or federal funding or both, there could be potentially, possibly other money than state and federal money. I mean, possibly private money. Why do we need to call those out? The different sources of funding.
So this was the language that we discussed. I don't know that we're anticipating any private money at this point for the program. We are anticipating state or federal funding or both at this point. And so that was why we called it out. And it's really just stating our intent that the agency would use that money if there is a possibility of private funding, the way that we've addressed that in the past is that, we would usually add another line that says, in addition, to the extent available, or to the extent that, possible, the agency may obtain private grant funding to proceed with the development. And then there's enabling language around that, which I have not had enough coffee this morning to
Okay.
recall off the top of my head, but we have a formulaic sort of language around that, and I could reword that. My understanding, and Patrick can speak to this more, is that there wasn't private funding on the horizon here that we were aware of.
Oh, and I don't anticipate specific private funding, but it just seems, for one reason I bring it up is that I just want us to think about other sources of funding and diversify our funding. That's one of the problems that we have in the transportation area, is that we just have very limited sources of funding. So I just think it's important to keep it in conversation that there could be sources of other funding. And the only thing I would think, if we included federal, and we don't, or I'm sorry, private funding, I think that would be everything, right? State, federal, private. I guess I would like to have some sort of word that includes all potential funding,
Okay. I mean,
but that's probably in conflict with
Yeah.
what we normally do. So I'm just raising it as a
so
thing that we can talk about.
yeah, there is language that we use for seeking grants and donations and so forth, or the ability to accept it. We use that typically with special funds where we allow that. And then there are always questions that come up around that of the questions about a conflict of interest. So for example, Oregon has a pilot for their mileage-based user fee, but their pilot is largely put out by the vendors that provide the technology. And so the question is, if you have a private grant from a vendor, do you want the AOT to be able to contract with a vendor for a discounted product, but then be stuck with that product? Or do you want them to do more of an open bid process, et cetera? So there are potential, not to say it's a bad thing, just to say that there are potential policy implications and ways that we would want to massage the words to make clear what your intent is, and to provide clarity to AOT as it moves forward with the program, so that they know what they can and cannot do if they are indeed being encouraged to seek out private grant funding. There's potentially a difference between the Gates Foundation and a Silicon Valley startup that tracks vehicle location.
Right. No, that's a good point. So I think this is a bigger conversation, but I would like to have it at some time. And what we would probably want to do is have just a general conflict of interest policy that would be for all situations. But that's
a
we
bigger
can talk
question than this bill.
offline. Yeah, we can talk.
And there are already state procurement standards,
Right.
And contracting standards. I'm just highlighting things that have come up in the past with other special funds, or with other entities that are allowed to seek grant funding, because of the potential for a conflict of interest.
That's helpful. Thank you.
So,
I would just say this out loud, and this is, for the years at the table, but more appropriately, the agency. We, did pass, a miscellaneous, DMV bill that put the T-bill out of balance. And a piece of that was on the recommendation of, the agency itself. And so if by some stretch this grant didn't come, and I've got 350,000 of T-bill money that was sitting there, would we choose to balance our books, or would we choose to take and wait on that? But at some point, very soon, I'm going to expect the agency to come in and suggest to us how, given the proposals that they had in the miscellaneous DMV bill, how they would accommodate for the hole that they recommended. And I only bring that up because there is 300 here, and if this didn't proceed, do we want the money just sitting there? Okay,
Especially in March, transportation revenue down 10%.
yes. Yep, our revenues are down. But we build budgets based upon on the estimate.
Yeah,
And that's statutorily what we're required to do. But outside of that, we did get a recommendation that from them that was about 700,000 out of balance. Section 29.
Sure, just a second here. I'm catching up on my notes. Okay, so section 29, this is the mileage-based user fee design section from the 2023 bill. So there are some updates in here. One is deleting the as reported by an inspection mechanic to DMV to provide a little more flexibility for how that process would look. It is still anticipated that mileage will be checked at the periodic inspection. On page 19, there's new language being added that provides that in the absence of an odometer reading during the mileage reporting period, the mileage-based user fee would be multiplied by the 98th percentile of estimated annual vehicle miles traveled. So in other words, you would get a 98th percentile mileage-based user fee for that year if you didn't have an odometer reading to report. So that's essentially a penalty for not reporting.
Okay, well, I'll ask the agency
Yeah,
what that means.
yeah, I mean, the simplest way to think about it is each year you pay a fee based on the miles traveled.
Yeah.
If there's no odometer reading to base the miles
What is
traveled on,
the mileage-based user?
the estimated annual vehicle miles traveled,
Yeah, who comes up with that?
that I'll let them answer that
That's
question.
what I
So,
thought.
yeah. Yeah.
You're pretty smart, but I didn't think you had all the answers.
I definitely don't.
But you're pretty smart.
Well, thank you for that. I appreciate it. So, all right. The mileage reporting period means the time between annual inspections or the time between the most recent annual inspection and a terminating event, i.e. move out of state, you sell your car. So that's just an update to clarify the language. On the very bottom of page 19, line 20, we've updated the date again. And on page 20, we've added in language to clarify again, instead of saying process to collect the mileage-based user fee within 60 days after annual inspection. It's to collect it on an annual, quarterly, or monthly basis selected by the vehicle owner and reconciled upon the renewal of registration or within 60 days after a terminating event. So this allows folks to decide whether they're going to pay it as a one lump sum, 4 lump sums, or on an annual or a monthly basis. Section 12 is the intent, is a new intent section, providing that it's the intent of the General Assembly that the mileage-based user fee would be approximately equivalent to the amount collected by the state and federal government in gas tax revenue from the use of an internal combustion engine pleasure car, and the amount collected by the state and federal government in gas tax revenue and EV infrastructure fee for the use of a plug-in hybrid electric vehicle. So two things to note here. The old intent language said state gas tax, not state and federal gas tax. But in the absence of federal action to provide a user charge, the House is proposing that the state mileage-based user fee be roughly equivalent to both state and federal gas tax. The other thing is there's a grammatical error in here. And on line 15, before the second, the amount, it should say and to the amount. So it's roughly equivalent to both of those amounts. And if they're slightly different, find somewhere that's roughly equivalent in the middle.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think the way this language reads is actually in contradiction to what we heard the agency testify on before, which is they described that they would be moving forward with inflation-based increase on this fee over time. That is not the gas tax. That is not federal gas tax. So based on my read of this language, it would be prohibitive of them having an inflationary measure on a miles-based user fee. At least that's how I read it. And I would go so far as to say I would like that clarified because I support that intent. But it sounds like it's in contradiction to what the agency presented to us before.
Okay. I'll let them speak to that.
Okay.
And
then my other question is, this is saying not that you would end up paying the same amount that you would in the gas tax, but that you would be paying roughly the equivalent cost. So that concerns me because electric vehicles make up such a small percentage of our drivers. So are we then in this language asking them to pay kind of what collectively all gas vehicles are paying?
No, so it's the way so roughly the equivalent to the amount that would be collected in gas tax for the use of a non-plug-in electric vehicle, pleasure car, singular.
Okay.
So rather than looking at, right now it's 80 some odd. Well, I don't know when you add in plug-in hybrids. But anyway, there's majority of cars are internal combustion engine. Then there's a subset that's plug-in hybrids. And then there's another subset that's battery electric. What this is saying is understanding that there is a broad range of gas tax that is collected based on the efficiency of the engine in the internal combustion cars, something that's roughly equivalent to that per mile expense that you would have in those cars, which is, so you're going to have to figure out average, miles per gallon, and then how many gallons on average, how much gas tax on average, et cetera, and then turn that into a mileage-based user fee. Same thing with the plug-in hybrids, except you have the electric vehicle infrastructure fee and then gas there. And again, this comes from, there's a range of plug-in hybrids. So they're all paying the EV infrastructure fee. That's sort of a flat charge, but then you can have a plug-in hybrid that goes 40 miles or 45 miles on battery power. So it's using very little gas, especially if you're just using it to run errands most of the time. And then you can have a plug-in hybrid that goes 15 before the internal combustion engine.
Yeah.
So that's why it says approximately equivalent. And there is going to be some averaging and calculating that has to go on here. Importantly, these rates have to come back to you for approval. This is just giving some guidance on where the General Assembly wants the initial proposed rate to be. And then my expectation is if all the funding comes through and we're moving towards July 1, 26, and everything goes on schedule and to plan, fingers crossed, knock on wood, grow salt, all of that stuff, then you would be back here this time next year saying, okay, so tell me how you came up with that amount. Tell me why that makes sense. And we're going to then decide if that's appropriate going forward, or if we want you to tweak it.
Yeah, I think I have a lot of concerns with this intent language. for numerous reasons. I appreciate you describing that we essentially would have a check back on this. So I'd love to just make sure that we have, that you, when we get to that language, if you could just explain it to me a little bit more in detail, because I think this is an even more massive change than what we were talking about with the Affordable Heat Act. So if you want to talk about cost on a fuel source, this is a much greater percentage-wise cost on a fuel source potentially than any conversation we had with the clean heat standard. So we're going to be massively changing the cost calculus for drivers. And I have a lot of concerns with the way this is framed up, because it seems like it's asking for solving a problem rather than identifying how do we support the bottom line of the average Vermonter. So when we talk about affordability, this section goes right at the heart of affordability. So I really hope we spend some time, and that anyone who advocated strongly for not having a variable cost measure with our thermal debate understands that this is going to be variable in the way I read the language. So I'd really like us to spend some time on it, I guess is my point.
Sure, and
I'd love to hear more about the check back piece.
yeah, so the important thing to note is all the language in here is just saying design the user fee. It's
Yeah,
not
that's what we
saying,
have, the clean heat standard.
right, it's not actually implementing anything. There's no enabling language. And I can't get into the politics on the clean heat standard, or the complications there. I know there were lots of debates and issues and questions and other things that came up in this body. So I'm just being clear that the language in here does not have anything that puts the mileage-based user fee into existence absent legislative action. So you still have to go the next step to enable it. And so that could involve additional delays, particularly if funding gets held up, and it can involve revisions to whatever proposal comes to you. So this is all mileage-based user fee design language.
Thank you.
Yep.
I'm gonna, may I ask you a question?
Yep.
It might be appropriate for the agency, but let me just,
And we're putting the agency in the chair next.
We only have one page left.
yeah, okay, I'll hold my.
Okay,
Okay. So on page 21, this is an authorization to transfer money that was appropriated to the Electrify Your Fleet program in state fiscal year 2024. My understanding from the testimony in the House is this money has not been utilized and that program has been underutilized. And this would transfer that money or authorize the expenditure of $325,000 of those remaining monies to continue AOT's partnership with Drive Electric Vermont to be used for programs and activities that support increased ownership and use of plug-in electric vehicles throughout the state. And then the effective date is July 1, 2025.
Can I just say on section 14, when I emailed all of you the things that I was hoping to see in the T-bill for money, this is one of the sections that I would really like to see remain in the T-bill. If you're wondering what I was referencing.
Thank you.
Okay. That's all I have,
all right.
unless there are additional questions for me.
Okay, I
Well, can I
All
have
right.
one other question about the intent section?
go ahead and
Yep.
then we're gonna move to the agency.
So we redefined earlier in this bill, BEV versus PHEV. And I'm just wondering about the intent section as it relates to those definitions.
So all we did in that section is we took the definition of no, that's actually,
Maybe it was a DEV bill.
yeah, it was. So what we did in that section is we added the definition of a cross-reference, the definition of BEV, PEV, and PHEV to the definition of pleasure car to say pleasure car includes those things.
Okay, thank you.
So that was really just clarifying.
So it doesn't change.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and actually
It is in this bill. Yeah, it's on page 2
is it?
is what I see.
Oh, so that's a definition for purposes of the bill. That's not actually yeah, we are cross-referencing those definitions that are already in statute. And then I think what you're remembering is that we added a cross-reference in the definition of pleasure car in the motor vehicle bill. But that's all the same definition. So we're not adding or changing those definitions. You did that, I believe, last year or the year before. And we've just added cross references, and this language at the beginning of the definitions is essentially boilerplate. We have very similar definitions each year. It gets updated as terms come and go from the bill.
Cause I'm just surprised, ZEV vehicle is usually what I feel like we're referring to when we bundle some of those, so.
We don't use that in our statutes. So we don't have the zero emissions vehicle. ZEV vehicles can include things like hydrogen fuel cells.
They should play mileage-based user fee too.
And I think at this point, the way the mileage-based user fee is set up is the initial proposal is to start with battery electric vehicles and then gradually expand in the future. And so that's just where things were set up in 2023 when that language was enacted. There are hydrogen fuel cell vehicles out there. I don't know the extent to which there's infrastructure to run them in Vermont, or the extent to which we'll see them anytime soon, but I know they're out there. They're now,
Ray might be
Yeah.
hydrogen powered as well.
yeah,
It is.
and they're, hydrogen fuel cell trains too. First ones are
But we're
rolling
not
out in
covered.
California in a couple of months. Anyway, that's beside the point. I'm going to yield to them and try not to nerd out about transport technology. And
It's okay, it's good.
great, thanks.
Who's leading the charge? Is it you, Patrick?
Sure.
What are you're last on the list, but you know, if you're
I
organized,
don't see Dan DeLeo. He's online. He's on Zoom. I'll show you. There's a few people on Zoom.
For the record, Patrick Murphy, State Policy Director for the Agency of Transportation. How would you like to begin?
we need to go through this section by section. My plan would be that if we have no problem with it, I'd put a check mark beside it and say, we'll move on from that and that will be in, but you, all except for a very few section in addition, the agency presented. And we'll have amendments on top of this. But I want to go through and if there's anything controversial, hopefully you have backup people here to answer. And if not that, we'll go outside of that group to get testimony. So.
Sounds good. Okay, so the first section is just adopting the transportation program. I think it's fairly straightforward. The second,
Is definitions.
Yeah, I
Do
do.
you have it?
Yeah.
We're gonna go slow because I want to go through here and if there aren't, and if the table's all right with it, we'll just say that's in
Okay,
for right now. And then we'll have additions on top.
okay,
I want to affirmative for everything in here. So.
great, thank you. So all of this language is underlined, which makes me think it's new. So what is new? What like, I mean, the mileage-based user, well, I don't know. What's new?
It's all new to the bill.
So if I can answer that.
Yep.
The section 1, all of the new language there, this is language that we adopt every year because we're affirmatively adopting the new transportation program that's been proposed by the administration, except as amended by the bill. And so when you see, for example, in section 1, that's language that's saying we're adopting the bill, we're using these definitions, or we're adopting the program, we're using these definitions. And when we say things like as amended, changes, this is what we mean when we're speaking about the transportation program. So for all of this session law, it is our practice to always do session law, so not amending statutes. Session law is always adopted with full underlining for the language, because it's new that year unless we're amending something from a prior bill.
Okay, so how could we tell if this language was different than the language used last year?
I can do a side by side for you. I can tell you that they're not 100% identical because I changed some of the definitions. I took out definitions that weren't in this bill. And I can also tell you that last year's bill said the Agency of Transportation's proposed fiscal year 2025 program. And this says the 2026 program.
No,
So yeah, there are differences, and some of the definitions are gone from last year.
yeah, I would appreciate that.
And we took out a technical correction section because the technical correction that we had was too long to just do in a subsection. It was getting confusing, so I made it its own section.
Okay.
But I'm happy to pull it out and show you.
Other than dates, is there anything in here that's substantive?
No. No substantive changes.
So
Okay, we'll just,
where I'm happy to have you provide the side by side, and if we find that, but if there are no substantive changes in here, are we all set?
with one, just a clarification, so this book is what we're approving with this language,
Yes,
the entire book.
except as amended by this bill. So you can amend any part of that book
Okay,
in this bill.
okay, but this entire book is what we're approving. I
Yes.
just want to be really clear about that.
Yeah.
Okay, and
But-
then,
There will be amendments to that book.
okay, I hope so. Okay, I'm good.
Go ahead.
And that would be my question to build off Senator Harrison, is we've heard from at least one person who's not my constituent, but is in the Northfield area, who has highlighted a particular project that they have concerns with. How would you want us to identify if there are specific projects or things that we have concerns about? If ideally would not be in section 1.
Ideally would not be in section 1, and we should, talk to our drafts people about drafting. I expect each of you, if you have specific projects that you are, concerned about, to bring it up, and we'll work with the drafts people to consider it within this.
Okay.
I will be completely honest, and I might as well put it out on the table with you, Patrick, that given the reduced amount of paving within this overall bill, and the fact that and I think it's in the maintenance budget, I'm particularly interested in what in the old days we called the shim coat, where you go out and you do the thin coat to patch a road through. Those budgets didn't go up in this. And in fact, and I'm gonna have to go, but I'm very interested in that to make sure that there's some recognition that there's going to be more people complaining about roads, and the agency's going to have to do that. I've been over a very long period of time, I've seen the agency come in quickly and do those projects. And I want to make sure it's recognized in this budget that with the amount of roads going down, that we're going to have to make some adjustments. And that's not a particular project, but I'm going to bring that in front of the committee.
Sure, Mr. Chair, Jeremy.
Well, yes, when we get there,
Okay, thank you, Chair.
when we get there,
Yes, sir.
I'm just raising that
Understood.
in the front to say, I'm going to want some comfort level with that, because going through the budget, I didn't have a comfort level.
Understood.
And that we're going to have to talk about, but I only brought that up as an example of something that I I want to make the committee talk about,
Sure.
right?
So we do still say Jim Code and Brattleboro.
Yeah, it's like-
So, you know,
That's what I say,
Yeah, yeah.
you know, I'm old.
but, something that I want to talk about, we don't talk about it now, but how the MPO is treated here. And, I don't see a specific section. I'm sure there is something, but I think that's important to discuss, at least briefly.
Okay, I'm gonna put okay next to this first section.
Okay.
If Damien comes back and you get to look at it and there's something that you think is of a substantive change, we'll come back to this.
It's like a hard next to it.
Okay,
So the next section is, change the rail program, project, and, we have Dan online to be able to speak to this.
hey, Dan,
Hey, good morning, everybody. Dan Delabrie, rail section. This is correcting an error on my part. There was a long-standing line item in the rail budget for the Wacker subsidy, which we no longer are paying. And that was intended to be replaced with a project that is needed at the White River Junction Station. The White River Junction roof is leaking. There's a sewer line issue. There's an electrical panel issue. And some of the ceilings on the second floor need repair. So it was a mistake on our part. And this is a correction to the book to correct that.
In the public goods.
so we take away the subsidy for the Barry Montpelier line.
All the whacker.
Little Wacker,
That's the Little Backer.
correct. Right behind you, right out the window. Yeah, across the road.
Yeah, every once in a while, a train goes down that.
Yeah.
And the Hartford thing is what?
Leaking
So-
roof.
Yeah,
sorry.
leaking roof.
Yeah, the White River Junction Station, the state of Vermont, we own that building.
Yeah.
And the cupola area is leaking, and the roof right below the cupola area is leaking onto the second floor. There's some offices in there, and there's some damage to the ceiling. One of the bathrooms, it's got some damage. Anyway, so the roof itself, we have a roof project.
$260,000 there.
I'm sorry, sir. Senator, I talked over you. What did I miss that?
Yeah, it's $260,000 to fix the roof.
Well, it's not just the roof. It's there's several projects there. Roof is the major project. Interior, some renovations inside to correct some of the damage. There's an electrical panel issue, and there's a sewer line that is continues to back up. We need to dig it up and replace the sewer main line going out to the street.
Can I ask, why are all the projects in this disproportionately in White River and Hartford?
Wait, I can answer this question. Because we have the most road miles in eight towns. We've got a junction. We are a transportation hub, a nexus,
You're the only town in the junction. US.
other than Essex.
Are we are we happy with the White River getting all this money?
Yes.
I guess so.
Oh, that's
I
okay.
wanna get the weather.
We'll give you a tour afterwards and the new weatherman will be there.
Okay.
Okay.
Do you have a question?
Well, I have specific questions on rail. Is this the right time to ask about them?
In general, or?
Well, just, budgets in Rockingham, I would like to, this is a topic that we talked about in a different committee, but, I'd like to have an amount of expenditures that VTrans anticipates in the next 40 years, because 40 years is the timeline of the dam license that are impacted by that, or that serve as bridges over the canal that serves only the dam. And there's can be a longer story. And there are rail bridges, which is what I'm noticing now, that I think are scheduled for service or rehab. We have at least one rail bridge that the state is responsible for, so I can do that offline.
Okay,
Yeah, there, just to clarify,
Yeah,
there's only one state-owned rail bridge, right? There's 4 rail bridges that enter the island, but there's only one that's state-owned. We did do a project on that. I'm gonna, off the top of my head, say 10 years ago. That bridge is in very good shape.
okay.
So I don't see a lot of investment on that particular bridge in the near future.
In the 40-year timeframe?
Well, yeah, I mean, I don't know. I have to look, but we did a pretty major rehab to that bridge. It meets 286, so it's not nearly the top of our list at all,
Okay.
right?
All right, and is it one of the bridges that's in the book?
It's not. We do not have a program project on that bridge. No.
Okay, that's good. So I'll circle back to you about the 40-year timeframe.
Okay.
okay. Section 2, then what we see in here is in. Section 3,
So section 3 is, town of St. Albans wanting to take over a portion of Route 36. And we have, I think, online Ashley Atkins to speak to that.
Yes, good morning.
actually,
Ashley Atkins, Deputy Director of District Maintenance and Fleet. And what I can provide is that we're working very closely with the town. There's no controversy. And we're looking to have everything finalized for the transfer of responsibility once the T-bill becomes effective.
so so what are we giving them? We're just giving them maintenance of the road themselves?
So we would transfer, we would relinquish 2.834 miles of Vermont 36. And that is from the city of St. Albans and St. Albans town line, west. And so they would have, they would have design, control, and flexibility with that roadway. They could more access to speed management, access management, and utility right of ways, which from the testimony that the town manager conducted within the house, they have 2 projects that they're working on, which this flexibility of the roadway and jurisdiction of the roadway would really help those projects come along in any future development that may happen in the Bay Area.
And is the town doing this because they really want to be able to use the right of way for utility work?
Yes, specifically the water and sewer extension from the city of St. Albans is one of those projects.
Go ahead.
Thank you. So if the town wanted to use state right away for the projects for the water and sewer, would the state doesn't charge the town for that, right? I'm just,
Yep, so there is work that can be done within the state right of way for utility expansions, but by the sounds of it, the flexibility of having the town own this land would allow for, potentially more expedient process of some of their projects.
okay, so they get the whole right of way, not just the road.
Correct, all ownership. Yep,
Okay, thank you.
you're welcome.
Ownership and responsibility.
Yeah, they get all of it.
Correct. The only responsibility that the state would have would be the center line, and anytime that there is a, reoccurring routine resurfacing project that would come through that area, then the state would conduct that kind of work. But all other responsibilities would be onto the municipality.
So we're really talking about Lake Street.
Correct. Yes.
Are we okay with this? All right.
Thank you.
Section 4, thank you.
So section 4 is just, changing the title of chapter 58. But the next several sections are about rail banking and rail trails. I don't know, Damien, if you just want to explain the section 4.
Yeah, so section 4 is as I mentioned during the walkthrough, it used to be called state acquisition of railroads. Now it's called state-owned railroads and rail trails. It does not change the authority in the chapter for the state to acquire railroad right of ways or the process for that. But it does reflect that at this point, the chapter governs or deals with more how the state is managing the rail right of ways that it owns, including the rail bank, rail trails. So we spent some time Thursday of last week, I think, discussing this.
Any problems with the title change?
Well, why do they want it?
Well, so it's related to the other 2 sections, and the update to the title just to reflect that we're talking about more than the state acquisition of rail line.
Do you want it so you can acquire more rail?
No, it's just to create a title that's more reflective of
Oh.
what we're seeking below.
So, okay.
And just to follow up on that, so it doesn't mean that you're not going to acquire more rail. It doesn't prohibit you from acquiring, right? Getting rid of this title, right?
It's just a more,
It's just more appropriate
Right.
because you're not in the process of acquiring rail now.
right,
State was previously. Is that accurate?
it's a broader title to include the language that you see below in the
Yeah,
next couple of sections.
okay.
You've been using the other title now anyways.
Right.
And this just brings it into compliance with what your practice has been.
Okay. That's
Yeah. If you look in the chapter itself, so there's one section on acquisition and modernization. And then you have sections for emergency repairs, leases for continued operation, sale or lease of state-owned railroad property for other purposes, rail banking, et cetera. So it's just one section covers acquisition and the rest covers what do we do with the land that we've acquired. And so this isn't going to change anything functionally. But I will say from a personal standpoint, this will save questions from my editors every time we go through the statute saying, do you want to change the title of this chapter? Because it looks like it does other stuff.
That's really good.
So I do appreciate it. The move to change it, because this is one of those things that comes up anytime we republish one of the green books.
Love it. Right. Heart.
I do. That leads to another question, of
Okay.
course. So the contracting out, leasing railroads.
Yes.
There was a change that I was proposing in a separate bill to just go back to the way it was done before last session,
Right.
the process. Is this the section where we would put that language? If we want to add that language?
You could. Yeah, it wouldn't be this section, but we could add a section here in the bill, in this area, or you could add it elsewhere, depending on whether you want to break out the concepts of leasing rail right of ways and rail trails, or you just want to keep the chapter together. So, but yeah, this is that chapter
Okay,
that we were dealing with.
okay. So, Mr. Chair, I would like to discuss that at some point, please.
But that would be in addition to changing the name.
Correct.
Okay.
And consistent with changing the name.
Section 5.
So, section 5 is just authorizing the secretary to adopt rules that govern the use of our state owned right of way, railroad right of way that are in rail bank status, and sort of define the penalties up to $300 the violations of those rules that are adopted. Our subject matter expert for this part of the testimony is due to come in. Well, if it's just, she has a conflict today.
And it's Jackie.
Jack Casino, yeah.
Okay. We changed from he to she to secretary. Which he or she would have been secretary anyways.
Right, so what we've done throughout the bill is changed, and this is something we're doing throughout the BSA right now. Is changing gender terms to just referencing the title or the individual or the person. And it's an effort to both avoid misgendering someone who may identify as non-binary, and also to increase specificity so that you're not saying, well, which he or she is this, when you have sections that are referring to like the commissioner and the applicant, or something like that. We also have a number of instances where businesses are referred to as he or she in Title IX and Title 21. And we've been correcting those because businesses can be a corporate entity. And the he or she language dates back to a long time ago when Vermont was more of a sole proprietor kind of state. So that's what we're doing here. So this is just sort of standard cleanup that we're doing.
And next such to the.
That is a personal change. I personally do not like the use of such. I think there is a very limited list of instances when such is appropriate and not needless legalese. So the would just be it's an equivalent term that I think is more clear to the average reader. I only use such when it's like such right of way shall, if you've been referring to it before. And in this case, I think B just reads better and is more clear to the average reader. So it's a change for clarity.
And in C, we don't change the section. It's 3408A. So we aren't changing. Are we changing anything here?
We are, because we've added section 3408A. And so we're adding the reference here because this is relating to the rules that the secretary can adopt.
Yep.
For interim trail use of rail banked rights of way. And in 3408A, we're specifically setting out prohibited activities on those rights of way. And so we're saying you have to adopt those rules consistent with the statutory prohibitions. So in other words, you can't adopt rules that we say fires in designated locations only. I don't know, we say no molesting wildlife. You can't adopt a rule that says you may molest wildlife.
But you can mow wildlife if it's fishing.
You can if it's fishing, but otherwise, yeah. So just going back to that term that everyone has loved so much.
But functionally, was the secretary adopting rules that didn't match the statute?
No, we just have added a new statutory set of requirements, which were requested by the secretary.
Which yes.
Yeah, so we're just saying.
And we already approved those.
Right, so we're saying for future secretaries, make sure any new rules you adopt are consistent with
The statute.
Yeah, that's all we're saying.
I think we're okay with that.
Yeah.
The last piece, and I am getting text that's saying this Dan might be able to address. Are you there, Dan?
I am. Is there a specific question I can, are we talking about the rail banking piece?
Yeah, we're still on rail banking, and it says any person who violates adopts pursuant to this subsection shall be subject to penalty of not more than $300. Is this yours? Or do you know anything about this?
I do not. I'm sorry.
This,
This is
Jackie.
Jackie D'Agostino's.
sorry,
I mean, I can talk about real banking. I'm just not sure what that particular section is.
I understand that the text I got was that Dan might be able to fill in for Jackie because she comes tomorrow, and I'm trying to work through this.
or
What,
I'm not sure where the $300 penalty came from. That's the piece I'm not sure.
the $300 penalty reflects the existing law at the top of page 6. You'll see in the existing law, any person who violates the rules adopted related to interim trail use shall be subject to a penalty of not more than $300. So we just mirrored that below for these provisions that we're setting out that we say that rules have to be consistent with. So that's where that came from. You could also write that to just say any person who violates the provisions will be subject to the penalty set forth in and refer back to the existing penalty. So that either option works.
I think it's clearer to say, go back to what already exists in statute. And then that says to anybody who looks at this, we're not changing anything.
Okay.
But that's just my preference.
I think that makes sense, because then if we want to change it, we don't have to change it in 2 places.
Right. Or more. So if you could make that change,
Make it a note right
make
now.
that change. I think unless you, go further than that, I think we're all good with section 5.
Okay,
Section 6.
the section 6 is a new section that's mirroring, as Damien said, the language in statute already, but for the use of rail trails. And that's where you get into the discussion that you all have had about the various permitted uses on the rail trail.
And should we wait here to talk to Jackie, or is this in Dan's area? What should we do?
Yeah, so this is primarily in Jackie's area, because she's dealing with the
I don't have any question.
management of the.
I don't either, but I want to make sure that the committee gets any questions that they might have answered.
But if we don't have questions, you don't have to wait for Jay, right?
Yep, and
It all looks good to me, and honestly, I thought this penalty at the end was what when we're talking about, that said $300.
It's fine. Yeah, I know what
Okay,
you're looking ahead.
yeah,
I found where you were talking about it. Yeah.
but otherwise, I think it's
is
fine.
that the same issue?
The subsection C there.
Yep.
That's exactly what I was talking about earlier. Refer back to the existing law, which is,
Yep. So it will change that in 2 places, then in 3.
that is, 3 is the existing law,
Okay,
which is, just, I've changed the language. So instead of saying these rules, I'm just saying rules adopted pursuant to this
okay,
subsection. And then I will refer back to, add in the cross reference back to that. That way there's no, lack of clarity around, are these 2 separate penalties for the same offense, et cetera. And we'll just be referring back to existing law. So that's what I will refer to. In subsection C of section 6 or 7, sorry. 6, okay. There we go.
right.
Yes,
So you'll bring clean and section 6 is approved.
yeah, and I compliment section 6, because I'm going to suggest some of these rules for trails that are not rail trails. And I just think it was a really thorough, logical, reasonable result. So thanks. Thanks to Jackie, if she's the one who did.
Section 7. And we're Transportation Board.
Yeah, so section 7, was something, that was brought to us to sort of clean up to reflect existing practice. So the executive director of the Transportation Board had testified in House Transportation, and essentially it's addressing, some minor language about the board being able to appoint other officers, and clarifying that, I think there's just a stylistic change at the end there as well.
Just, so currently, the governor appoints the chair. And I thought he appointed the individual members also, but that's
He
not
does.
so. He does.
It does, and that doesn't change.
Okay.
So if you look at the lines 20 and 21 on page 8, says there shall be 7 members of the board appointed by the governor with the advice and consent of the Senate. And then if you turn to page 9, lines 2 and 3, it's currently says the governor shall appoint the chair, period. And what we're saying is the governor shall appoint the chair and the board may vote to appoint other officers. So the governor is going to select who's on the board. This just allows the board to say, we'd like to have a clerk. We'd like to have a vice chair. And we can make those appointments itself.
Very good.
Are we fine with that?
Yeah.
Yep.
I would, Megan, if we don't have the board chair of, the present chair of the Transportation Board, could you just email them and have them get back to us about these changes? We've got changes here in section 8, just to have them say yes. So if we got any questions, we could say, we've heard back, and email's fine.
Okay, they are supposed to come this week.
We're scheduled for tomorrow.
They're scheduled for tomorrow.
Yeah.
Then why don't we hold this and the next section change, we'll hold them till tomorrow.
Yeah, because I do have a question on the next.
Okay. Section 8.
So yeah, section 8 is likewise just creating language that reflects current practice, and I think Jeremy can speak to how the Transportation Board provides appellate review and what this language is actually doing.
So if I could, Chair.
Yeah.
Yeah, so this is just updating the language to reflect current practice and identifying that the T-Board would provide appellate review for construction claims that we have with the contractor, but any appeals related to bidding would stay within the agency, which is the current practice.
So somebody puts in, give me an example.
So if somebody wants to essentially protest a bid award, instead of there being some ambiguity about whether or not the T-Board would hear that appeal or the secretary, this just cleans that up and explicitly says the secretary would hear that appeal, as opposed to essentially going through a T-Board hearing for a bid appeal.
Can you appeal the secretary's decision to the team?
So the handful of times I'm aware that's happened, it goes directly to court.
I'm gonna have a question on this.
And we'll have the T-board tomorrow.
Well, I guess this one's on hold.
Not that you have to take my word for it, but we have received concurrence from the keyboard with these changes. We did have more expansive changes.
Well, we're gonna
originally.
hear from.
I understand.
So,
But I'm just trying to take the conversation out. This was a much more expansive change, and this is the sort of compromise language.
okay. How many appeals do we get?
For bidding, not very many, maybe 1 or 2 a year at the most. I think the construction claims are much more prevalent, although we generally are able to resolve them before they get to the keyboard. So I don't believe we've got the keyboards. Probably here.
When you say construction claims, that's like the pothole that ruined my tire kind of claim.
No, this is a contract interpretation issue between the contractor and V-Trans.
The T-board also does the pothole damage.
Yeah, the damage claims.
Yes.
And I don't have any information for those, but
Okay, we'll hear from them tomorrow, and I don't think they'll be unless Wendy has.
She's on it. She was.
She was on the keyboard. She's off now. Okay. Section 9.
Okay, so this section is modifying language that defines Green Mountain Transit's territory, its area of operation. It's not it's allowing for the possibility, as you've heard in testimony from Ross a couple of times now, to be able to reorganize the rural services and provide more cost-effective services over time. It's not directing it in any one way, but allowing for that possibility. And I believe Ross is online as well.
Behind you. Yep.
Ross?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ross McDonald, Public Transit Program Manager. GMT and V-Trans have worked on this section together and both agree of these changes. All it does is it aligns the GMT rural services with the other 5311 FTA rural services around the state. So just as we've made service changes and route adjustments across regions, this just allows us to do similar decisions through the granting plan. And yeah, that's where we are with this section.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would just note that in my request to the committee, I asked that we help fund public transportation to a greater degree to the tune of $250,000. I can see that going in this section.
Could you repeat what you just said?
Ooh, can I do it verbatim?
I give you the gist.
I just wanted to note that in the email I sent out to the committee and to JFO and to our legislative council on S75, one of the additional sections I was hoping to see was more financial support for our public transit system. And I put that in to the tune of a request of $250K, and I can see it going in this section.
Or in conjunction with this, and
Yeah.
we're gonna later in the week be dealing more with medical transports. So, but in
I'm supportive.
this, we've taken a fair amount of testimony from all of the providers, and I think what we heard from providers is that they could accommodate these routes and do it, and there is some savings related to that. So, are we okay? Yep. Okay. Section 10.
Section 10 was something that was prioritized by House Transportation, creating new minimums for the town highway aid programs for class 2 town highways as well as, structures. And this allows that minimum to potentially increase, over time, by tying it to an inflationary factor, or the overall increase, in the transportation budget.
So in both sections, it's H and or E and H. Doesn't seem to be in order. If that's what it is.
So yes, little e
Yeah,
is town highway structures.
and a little A is highway. So in both sections, they talk about the minimum total estimated state share cost. What do you mean? Is that the cost share? I think it's called, so like in line 14 on stage 13, it says the minimum total estimated state share cost for the approved grant shall increase. So is this not only the appropriation is increasing, but the state share of the project cost is increasing?
Yeah, so right now, the way the language is it doesn't say how much money needs to be appropriated. It just sets out a minimum for new grants that would be approved in each fiscal year.
Yeah.
So, and if you'll notice, lines 8 and 9, each fiscal year, the agency shall approve qualifying projects with a total estimated state share cost of $7.2 million minimum as new grants. So what that's saying is that the grants will have a local share cost too. This is saying the state share approved every year has to be at least 7.2 million. It doesn't say that money has to go out the door because the grant funding the projects can take time. So the money may go out the door later. And what this is saying on lines 14 and 15 is we're going to increase the minimum that has to be approved every year to track the increase in the appropriation every year, so that we don't end up in a strange situation. And I wouldn't expect it to happen currently, but you could theoretically have a situation where you have a minimum appropriation of, let's say, $11 million, but a minimum grant of 7.2. And for whatever reason, the agency could decide at that point, well, we've appropriated this money, but we're only going to issue out the minimum number of grants. So this is just keeping it consistent and keeping that minimum grant language in there as we add in the minimum appropriation. So the expectation is that they will track with each other, same inflationary factor on them. And so they should just track.
And one is saying you need to appropriate so much money into the grant program. And the other one is saying you got to appropriate so much money. You have to grant out so many.
Approve grants up to that amount every year. As a minimum, at a minimum.
And the approved qualifying projects is the same as approving a grant.
So you're approving projects with the state share, with new grants for the state share of those projects. And the reason this language is in here, and it's different from the state, the current inflator on the town highway is that's got a formula that's set out where X% goes to this type of roadway project, et cetera.
Okay, yeah, it was confusing the way it was worded. And on line 21, in my online version, the governor is highlighted. Did I do that for some reason, or I don't know if that on page 13? I feel it's just weird. It's not online. It's not okay. That's just not on paper.
Yeah, no, it's not highlighted here.
I have another question for this section. Cam.
Yeah.
Which is on page 15. Which is the percentage change in interest in public appropriations. So why this weird language about as compared to the fiscal year?
So,
Did they used to be the fiscal year immediately preceding the most recently closed fiscal year, and we're changing it just to the most recently closed fiscal year? Is that what's happening?
yeah, no, so it's what you're looking at is, so you're taking the percentage change in the what we over yeah, and yeah, you're
Comparing those two.
right. So we're just basically saying, so say fiscal year 24, you had 800 million, fiscal year 25, you had 808 million.
It's gotta be a better one over. But I get it.
So, I
So
don't.
basically you're saying
that
how
it's
to,
clunky,
how to do the calculation for the percentage.
right? What we're doing here is just mirroring the language that's in subsection A.
Okay.
So.
We just wouldn't word a math problem.
I might word it differently if I was drafting fresh.
Yeah.
But this is what we had in here, and so we wanted to keep everything the same. So we didn't end up with confusion about, are you changing the way we've been calculating this?
And then at the bottom of page 15, that's the same as just the other program, this state contract. It's just a mirror of the
That's correct.
number of grants.
Yep, same thing.
Okay. Figure it out. I'm okay with it.
So I'm really almost agnostic to any of this.
Honestly,
My problem with all of this is it's not based on anything real. It's based upon what we appropriate. And my question, and it's to you, what do we collect now? We collect some information now about the state of bridges in our towns.
correct. So currently we have data on the town long structures, which would be over 20 feet. Anything less than 20 feet, we don't collect. We don't collect any pavement condition on our town highways. And we have what I'll classify as a portion of a culvert inventory, but I think that's a proportion. So like, to your point, we don't have today nearly the data related to needs on the town network as we do the state.
So the bridges that are over 20 feet, do we do the calculation on their bridges? Do they do the calculation? How does that get reported to the state
The calculation for needs or the calculation on,
for the shape of the bridges?
so we do the calculation. So when I come in and report that 7% are in poor condition, that's our calculus based on our bridge inspections.
So we have bridges above 20 feet. Pavement condition for towns. Does anybody collect anything anywhere that we know about?
I'm not aware of any.
How about under 20 feet in town, in the town store? Anything?
I don't believe so, no. I mean, I won't speak for all towns, but just,
Yeah.
it's me being on the select board, we don't inspect our shores.
So no one collects any information about the $800,000 culvert that is
Correct.
metal and
50 years old, we don't know about it.
Or at least if they collect it, they don't report it anywhere. Like,
Correct.
Just that they use it towards figuring out the appropriate.
Yeah, and that's where I think there's probably some disparity between some towns and others as far as what they use for asset management principles, how in tune they are with their inventory, what their capital needs will be. You know, I certainly suspect Burlington is very different than my town of Oxford. But across the board, there's no standard and there's no consolidation of that information to predict a town highway program.
does the agency ever do a survey of communities? Pick any number and say, this is what you thought here's the increasing cost in projects for similar projects over time. Does anybody do anything estimate the cost increase for towns in the project.
Not aware of anything.
Ask them to when this bill will start to do that.
Well, I'm working. But I'm not asking these for, so. So
I'm getting where you're going.
how would we move that along and how would the agency suggest we move that along? I would have hoped that as we gone through some of this, the league might have had some interest in this, but I
Sure.
don't see them.
So we are proposing, and I believe Michelle sent some information to the league and the RPCs related to possible legislative language to look at, is there a viable way for the agency to help towns with their asset management sort of principles and inventory, and then sort of a concurrent effort to determine what those needs would yield from a funding and finance report to keep in good repair. I will say that it would probably be overkill to take the way we do things and just apply it to the towns.
Like, we're so far from that. I don't think-
Understood. but
Do the RPCs collect any information now?
I don't know.
They collect priorities, but not condition.
Yeah, they have priorities, but not condition. For me, it's a real problem to not have any measure of what the problem is out there. This goes up CPI, but we just heard from the state that we've gone through a 5-year period where they've had 40% increases in stuff at the state. I can't believe the towns don't have the same issues.
They don't know it yet.
Well, if they put out a bid to pave a road, they certainly probably felt that.
Can I ask a question? Does
Go
the
ahead.
administration support this thing?
What's in the bill?
Yeah, section 15.
Dan, I'll defer to Candace on that.
Hannah Soundquist, Chief Financial Officer. So this was a House Transportation Committee
Right.
priority. I'm agnostic, like similar to Senator Westman. Anytime there's either a hard-coded value in the statute or session law or a calculation of a value, we take that into consideration for the budget. But what was just being proposed by Jeremy would really mean that the needs would be more in line with our budgeting process for all other divisions of AOT. Like right now, when we're thinking about what our highway program needs, what EPS, policy, public transit, rail, maintenance, like we have a very thorough budgeting process that starts back in August. And I think what we're seeing here is that perhaps we haven't fully pulled these programs into our budgeting process. If we were to, I would float the idea of eliminate the hard-coded value and the calculation from statute. It would allow us to take a more needs-based approach for all 3 programs.
So and I'm totally not opposed to in the interim looking at what the House Committee has put together, but it's based on numbers that aren't tied to projects anywhere. At probably sometime in tomorrow or the next day, if you've got some ideas for us about how we might collect some of this information. It really relates to their increase in cost in projects, the condition of pavement, the condition of those structures that are under 20 feet. And how do I get a handle on what their increasing needs might be?
And that's where I think we would look at, partnering with RPCs and the league to develop that system to say, given the disparity amongst towns in the state as far as their sophistication and internal resources, how can we define such a I'll just call it a inventory or asset management tool that then would deliver some needs for a certain condition.
Can we get you in the chair sometime later this week? Can you bring some language to us?
Yes.
Perfect. Thank you. I'm totally not opposed to looking at some inflationary increase, but I want to figure out a way going forward to tie it to something. So I would say we're on hold here for these sections for the moment.
So, sorry, I had to go out. It's section 9, does it have a check mark next to it? That would be an easy one. That's the Green Mountain Transit Authority.
I have a section 9 check mark next to it.
Yep.
So can I do you have a question on that one? Or I can just forfeit. Or trade for
If
things
it's,
later.
let's, is it a quick question?
I think it is. It could
Okay,
be.
yeah, you can do it quick.
Okay, thank you. So on line 16, where it says,
Which page?
I'm sorry, 10. Because it's section 9. Area, so the area of operation. Again, it's just, I don't want to limit us too much. So it says, Green Mountain Transit Authority may operate service outside of Chittenden County or demand response traffic, transit within Chittenden County as determined by the Agency of Transportation's public transit grant process. I think you probably chose the public transit grant process as the mechanism to be the Agency of Transportation's approval. But again, there could be other sources of revenue. I just want to have our statutes be able to contemplate other sources of revenue. So say the train agent, I mean, I'll use a say Amtrak was willing to throw in some money to have essentially dial a ride to service the one of the rail stations. And so the Green Mountain Transit Authority was would want to do that with that other funding. I just think it could be said as determined by the Agency of Transportation's or subject to the Agency of Transportation's approval.
So I think what this language is getting at, and I don't know if Ross is still on, but this is looking at that mid-year process that he discussed in his prior testimony about in anticipation of the budget, then there are negotiations with each of the service providers, and so it's through that granting process that service territory is defined.
No, I understand that, and that's where the funding from the state and the feds is defined also. But if there's different funding, I could just ask Ross and maybe he could come back later about it. I just think it would be better if it just simply said as determined by the Agency of Transportation's or requiring approval of the Agency of Transportation. I think you would get what you want in a way that could be more flexible if we find other funding for things.
Talk to Ross.
I will. Okay.
And we know you put a little flag. We're going to put a little flag next to that.
Okay.
But we generally, the concept have approved to move toward this.
I mean, I suppose sorry, Mr. Chair. I suppose you could just, the last 4 words of that line, eliminate and strike those. That's
It's determined by, and the front.
as determined by the agency.
Yeah. Or as approved, I would say. I think we can come to a good point.
I think because we put the town highway stuff on hold. You're gonna be in the chair very soon and give us some thought, your thoughts, so we can. What I would envision in the, either the front or the back of all of this, we make an attempt to push them towards, doing some asset management work.
And some of them do that.
I think some of the towns do that. Is there a
Yeah.
way to incorporate what some of the towns do, so we can get a better idea of the overall?
Yes.
And it would be nice to have somebody be able to sit down and say, our town highways were at this level. This is how many roads we've got for shape. Good. And in that piece, it's hard to make a judgment where we're headed when we don't collect any of that. We're up to mileage based.
So
When, before we start on that, do you have any report on the grant from the feds?
So we've updated our statement of work that we submitted as part of the grant application and sent that to Federal Highways. We've heard from them that they anticipate this grant moving forward, but we don't have any timeline at the moment to be able to share with you all.
When did they ask, and did they have an end date on? I've heard 90 days this was held up for.
Yes, and then it's
How far are we into the 90 days?
well, goes back to I think beginning of February. So we're 2/3 of the way there. But we did have outreach from FHWA headquarters that it looked like it looked promising that we would be able to still receive the award that we would granted in November. But just we have no sense of when they will ultimately reach out to get a grant agreement together. But I don't anticipate it being just withheld altogether.
Can I just functionally to do the IT systems to make this work? Have we got a contract with someone, or where are we in all of that?
So we have, two different contractors the DMV works with for the inspection, the safety inspections. Parsons sort of manages those contracts with all the independent businesses that perform those on behalf of the state. And then we have the FAST contract, which has managed the whole IT upgrade of the past couple of years. We anticipate that we would just be building off of those two systems to be able to bring together the data from the vehicle safety inspections, join that with registration data, be able to generate bills within the MyDMV system. And so we would anticipate using our existing vendors to be able to build just another module that would allow us to do that. It still has to go through the Agency of Digital Services process for reviewing an IT project, which is looking at what the scope of work would be, and then determining how much that should cost. And that's an independent analysis that's done and managed through the Agency of Digital Services. So it would follow the same guidelines of an IT project, but it's beyond that because it obviously has it with FHWA, it's a transportation project. So there's communication, needs for not just, folks that would be receiving the fee now, but to be able to make sure that people fully understand, what it is and where, what needs are, and where it would go. So there's, it goes beyond just the, typical IT project. Yeah.
Are we gonna be done? Are we gonna be done? Say we get the approval and we start work in May. How much confidence should I have we'll be done by July 1st of 2026?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to say because, we don't know when our starting date would be. With the federal project, you can't incur any costs before, actually having a grant agreement in place. And so it's hard to say whether we'd be able to meet that deadline, but I think having that deadline is important because we want to be able to implement it as soon as possible. And so that's what, if the legislature defines that as a target, that's what we're moving towards. If in the course of, the beginning work of doing this, we come back in January and feel like we need more time to responsibly, implement the program, then we would provide what that, refined estimate for a launch date would be. But I think, if we have language in here as is proposed, that we implement something by July 1, 2026, then that's what we'd be working hard to meet.
But I just want to recognize what we can physically do,
Sure.
what our expectations are, and make sure that for me, I don't want to hold this up. I just want to make sure that if I've got delays in getting started now, where that all fits. And fit the dollars to go with that, to make sure that we quite frequently, because we want something, we rush it along and aren't always good at making sure that we get there. So,
Yeah, and I appreciate that, because if we do rush it too much, that's when different errors can, if there's not enough time to do the testing within the system, and importantly, I think to have enough of a lead time for the communications and outreach to folks that are going to be impacted by it. There needs to be that ability so that you all aren't hearing from them, come July 2nd of 2026, about the concerns that they have.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I would just say we're already hearing concerns that people have. As I pointed out in a previous committee conversation, I believe I'm the only person who campaigned on a mileage-based user fee. And I got multiple directed, targeted campaigns against me, specifically calling out this. So I do think it's more controversial than we're letting on, although I'm fully in support of it. I think what I'm struggling with, and it sounds like you might be as well, is understanding how realistic, even if we found out within the 90 days that we got the money, is the proposal. Thank you. And so I'm wondering if you perhaps, with the language that we could get with a check back, maybe that would help alleviate some of those concerns, something that's more concrete about making sure that before anything moves forward, that we know and we're aware of it, and can address any concern.
Well,
Because this will make, for example, me as a driver pay significantly more potentially per mile that I drive, which is a concern for me. And I would like to know how much that's going to be. In the same way, any gas car, if we were doing a 1 cent increase on the gas tax, we would be hearing left, right, and center about it. But because this is on a specific group of people who don't necessarily know that it's coming, I think that there's going to be a lot more pushback, so you should have more. Yeah, if we did a 1 cent gallon increase, we would be hearing from everyone. This is certainly going to be more than a
Well,
1 cent gallon increase.
I'm also, if there will be controversy. And for me, I want to make sure that when we do this, there's not hiccups. Because when you do something like this and you go to put it in place and then, and there's hiccups, it always creates angst. The piece of me that bothering in the back of my mind, is would we better to say, instead of July 1st, January 1st of 27, 6 months, we just lost 3 months because we've been waiting, on a grant. And if we came back in January, it's not right. It's not, we've got to act, and then 3 months later it gets extended. We've got to, and we give ourselves some room around that. I want to make sure that when we move in this direction, that we know we've got it right and we're not rushing to extend dates and do all of that stuff. Because we're already fits and starts with the money.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that, and I think the agency is going to have the same approach, that, you know, we're not going to want to implement something that's half-baked. I think having
And I have to tell you, I've been around long enough. I've seen IT projects in transportation that were not always successful. I don't show. Were you thinking of DMV?
You read my mind.
I'm just saying. So I just want to make sure that what we do, it's done right.
Sure. And I think that it was a significant investment that the legislature made in the IT, the core modernization effort. And that largely is what we will build off of, and what makes this more possible than in other states where they don't have the same, where they're still grappling with the, multiple databases and the systems that have lots of workarounds and just aren't able to build off a foundation that we now will have in place. So I think that's what gives us optimism that we can do this and do it effectively. I think having the July 1st, 2026 date allows us to still maintain that possibility of implementing it. As we've heard, was a priority from House Transportation. And if we get to this point in January of next year, where we feel like that is too rushed to schedule, then we can again update this language to reflect that. I think just stressing what Damien had mentioned earlier in this morning, that this is not statutory language that implements the program. It's just directional language to the agency.
Well, we can change the date in here.
Sure.
And we're putting a date off a period of time. And I'm uncomfortable not finding some ground where we're absolutely confident we can do this right. Because I think doing it right is important.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I totally agree that doing it right is important. And I actually had a comment like another time on one of these 2026 dates. Could you, this conversation is continuing, right?
Yep,
We'll have another.
It is.
So could you bring us a typical schedule, like you were talking about the stuff that you need to do for the federal government?
Yep.
Just show us what that schedule is, and so you would be able to see and tell us on what date is it do we not have enough time? And that date might be sooner than we think. So that would be helpful for the next conversation.
Sure.
It would be helpful to see a timeline. of
Yeah,
What,
so we, as part of the grant application, you have to submit a proposed schedule. We can
Yeah,
share that and get it.
that would be great.
It's existing language, but on page 17(3) is about collecting a fee and kilowatt hours. Thought it was more like kind of we do one or the other. If you do both, then it's under White Point, and then the EV driver can be even doubly charged. They have a mileage-based user fee and a kilowatt hour.
Yeah, this was language that was proposed by the legislature back in
What were they thinking?
2023, and we provided testimony that there is the concern around double taxation, especially for those folks who rely on public charging that don't have access to home charging.
I think I remember, well, I know there was one person on the committee at the time that thought this was the way to go instead of an MBUF. So it seems like it's in here that you would do both, and I think we should change this to be like, if you don't do one, you do the other, than doing both. That's not our intention. This is just an intent section.
And I think the way that we're interpreting this is that if in the future it becomes a possibility that we're able to work out a system in which we are able to collect revenue from out of state EV owners, that we would be able to kind of work with that. But at this point, we've done the analysis on this, and it doesn't work out from the amount of money that we'd have to invest in it, the complexity with the utilities, and then the amount of revenue that we would see from it, because
So we should either strike it or clarify that it's only if we don't end up doing the MBUF and we're able to do it.
Remind me if we stopped the surcharge on registrations when
We started.
We started it.
we started it,
January.
and it is it tied to a mileage-based fee going in at all, or we just keep it on regardless?
It repeals when
It feels that
it comes active,
When
when the MBUF takes effect.
you're gonna pay to repeal the surcharge.
Yeah, so right now, if you have.
Infrastructure fee.
Yeah, so right now, if you have an electric vehicle, when you go to register it this year, there will be the $89 registration charge.
Yep.
There will be an additional $89 electric vehicle infrastructure fee, and then I believe that's per year of the registration, or is that the one?
it's an annual fee.
Yes, it's an annual fee. Once the mileage-based user fee is effective, so it's actually being charged, that will go away. For EV drivers, the half fee for plug-in hybrid remains unless and until the mileage-based user fee is applied to plug-in hybrids. So that's just worth keeping in mind.
So July 1st, that would theoretically go away.
Of next year.
Of next of 26.
Yeah,
July 1st of 2026, that goes away.
that's right.
If the MBUF is in place.
For EV drivers only.
I thought you were saying 2033 was the earliest we would have.
Yeah.
Yeah, for EV drivers.
No,
You would have it by, so that's what you're saying is.
Right, I'm trying to figure out if July 1st of 2026, the $89 is supposed to go away. And and then this goes into place. That goes away. I'm just in my head in the timing here, trying to make sure that I get this all done. I hate the idea of saying to people, well, I'm changing the date here. next January, if this doesn't go well, I'm changing the date. And I've got all of these people trying to figure out when they should register their car and when they shouldn't. You know, I think clarity is important. Because I want to look deliberate in this, not like. Go ahead.
Oh, did you?
Go,
I'm-
whatever.
I didn't see that you raised.
Example.
Well, we are gonna see the timeline, so that
Yep.
might improve the clarity. We could say by December of 2026. Is that right? So that it gives a buffer time, but it has to be advertised at least 6 months prior. But then I have a different
Go ahead.
thing to ask about. And this is relative to Senator Fridge's comments on the fee on kilowatts that are dispensed through certain electric vehicle supply equipment. Just on the topic of other revenue sources, there was a little short conversation about getting transportation funding from user fees from electric utilities. And that is on the list of recommended sources of revenue. So I'm just remarking on it because I think changing this doesn't say we're not going to, or deleting this wouldn't delete the possibility of that other revenue source. And it would be more, so, I mean, that's a whole conversation, but I just want to keep mentioning alternate revenue sources when I see them, if you don't mind.
No,
Okay.
I think we are going to get past the miler case, and we are at lunch. And we're back